I love the way these guys use modes, and I've often wondered, is that one of the missing links between a pro player and a beginner? A few months ago, I sent out a questionnaire to about 50,000 guitar players asking them how they use guitar modes. Well, I just got the results back, and it turns out that about 97% of them are wrong. So this begs the questions: why are so many players confused about modes? What is the right way to understand modes? And most importantly, how can you use that knowledge to help you express yourself on the guitar? First things first, I want you to understand why so many guitar players are confused. See, it has to do with the origin of these modes. In the beginning, there was the major scale. And that major scale was perfect in so many ways. It was melodic, it was full of emotion, full of joy, and whenever you heard it, you felt at home. Now that major scale is pretty much the source of all music we hear today. We all have that sound ingrained in our heads, and there's so many cool melodic ideas that are born from that major scale. Now, to understand where modes come from, we need to take a look at a very particular context where that major scale was used. Well, let me take you back to the early days of the Roman Catholic Church. Within the context of that church, a lot of songs were written to worship. And what I'm talking about here is Gregorian chants. Now, all those chants were built around that major scale, but not all of them started from the first note of that scale. And because there were so many of these chants, there was a need to classify them. And the way these chants were classified was by looking at the first note of that chant. And because all these chants were built around the major scale, and because the major scale has 7 different notes, there were 7 different types of classifications for these chants. See, all chants that started with the first note of the major scale were put in that particular box. All chants starting with the second note of that major scale were put in that second box, and so forth. And we had 7 boxes, and these boxes were given different names: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. So that's where modes came from historically. And that's also why they are called church modes. And that's how most guitar players view modes. They just see it as the starting point of the major scale. And yeah, it's true. Historically, that's where it started from. So that kind of explains why so many players view modes that way. But is that really useful? It's not, unless you go the extra step, which we're going to do right now. This is where you really need to trust me. The reason the major scale sounds the way it does is because of its intervals. An interval is the distance between 2 notes, and in music, the smallest interval we have is the one between 2 adjacent notes, and that's called a half step. Here's the cool thing with the C major scale, which is the one from which all those chants are extracted from. On a keyboard, that scale is only played with white notes, and that makes it really easy to visualize the blueprint of our major scale. If 2 consecutive notes within that major scale have a black note in between, we're dealing with 2 half steps, a whole step. And that major scale is made of a lot of whole steps, except between the 3rd and the 4th note, and the 7th and the 8th. You don't need to remember that, but I just wanted to show you what the formula of a scale is. Okay, let's go back to the 7 types of Gregorian chants we have by starting one of these chants from one of the 7 notes of the scale. These chants are all built from that common major scale. And they're all really part of the same exact key. A key is the scale from which we are building a song. And back then, there was one key, the C major scale. So all these chants were really part of the same exact key. Now there's a term for that. Derivative modes are those modes that are extracted from a common major scale. And this is where most guitar players stop, and that's really hurting your playing, because when you are using modes as derivative modes, modes that are all part of the major scale, you kind of get into unhealthy shortcuts. And this is what that shortcut looks like. Let's say you have to play over a backing track that is in B Dorian. So what you'll do is think of these derivative boxes extracted from a common major scale, and you're thinking, okay, Dorian is that second box. Therefore, what I need to do is start my major scale from the second note, and I'll sound Dorian. Now, yeah, you'll sound kind of Dorian, but it's not really going to be controlled because you are bringing back each of these derivative modes to a single major scale, which typically will be locked into your fretboard with a pattern. And you're going to be stuck in that pattern, which means that all your licks are kind of going to be directed by a shape. And we talked about this on the channel quite a bit, where when you're playing in a shape, where your fingers are comfortable with that shape while you're not really in control of the music. Your fingers are doing the talking. It sounds okay, but it doesn't really express the ideas that you have inside of you. It's very shape-based, kind of an automatic type of playing. And that's what I meant earlier when I said that seeing modes that way can really hurt your playing. You're not going to fully express yourself. This is what I want you to do. Please trust the process. Take a look at this. Remember when I told you about the formula of the major scale, where each note was separated by half steps? Some were separated by 2 half steps, others by 1. And that's what kind of created the blueprint of that scale, what gave that scale its sound. Well, we're going to use that to really understand modes. And this time, we're no longer going to see modes as derivative modes, but as parallel modes. And we're going to take these 7 different modes that the Gregorian monks loved so much, and we're going to start each of these modes from the same exact note. We'll pick C, for example. This is where it all starts. 7 different modes here. These 7 modes have in common the fact that they have 7 different notes. And I say different because if they weren't different, we'd have the same modes. Now, to understand this, we need to take a look at the keyboard. This is a C major scale, which is the scale from which all the Gregorian chants are extracted from. The smallest distance we have between 2 notes in Western music is called a half step. This means that between the first and the second note of a C major scale, we have 2 half steps. This is the first one, and that's the second one. In the same way, the distance between the second note of a major scale and the third one, we also have 2 half steps. That's a full step. Between the third note and the fourth note, we have a half step. Let's continue. Between the fourth and the fifth, we have a full step. Between the fifth and the sixth, another full step. The sixth and the seventh, another full step. And then between that seventh and that first note, which is an octave higher, we have a half step. Anytime you have a scale that uses this formula, you're dealing with the Ionian mode. Now don't worry, you don't need to memorize that as long as you understand that that formula is unique to the Ionian mode. If we do this for each of the 7 different modes, we will have 7 unique formulas made of a succession of full steps and half steps. This is where things get really interesting. We're going to play these 7 different modes using the 7 different formulas from the same exact note. And we'll start all of these from C on our keyboard. The first one is easy. It's built in. We're just playing the white notes, and we have this formula written for us. Whenever we play white notes, we're just going to leave these numbers as they are. Let's take a look at this second formula for Dorian. And remember, these ones are all starting from C because we're using parallel modes. 1, 2, that's a full step. Now, if we're playing Dorian, between 2 and 3, we have a half step. So that's going to be a black note. So we'll indicate that with a flat. Then between that 3 and that 4, we have a full step, a white note. 4, 5, another white note. 5, 6, another white note. 6, 7, that's a half step. That's a black note. Eventually you have something like this, and you might say, David, that's too much to memorize. I understand why you're saying that, and it's not your fault. It's because most guitar players see modes that way, and they don't do the actual work of writing these things down. But if they did, you would notice this. This note, this one, this one, this one, and this one. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7. The minor pentatonic scale. In the same way, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. We find these 5 notes in Lydian and Mixolydian. Those correspond to the minor pentatonic scale and the major pentatonic scale. Now you are seconds away of using all of this knowledge on the guitar, but there's one more critical step, and we're going to do that together. Created a free workshop. It starts right now. You can sign up for free right here, and we'll get that covered. I'll meet you right there.